Good day. This is the Professor, CBMD PhD. Today is Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. It is 10:46 and 54 seconds a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And today's research, UFO cryptography. So let's hop to it here. We are not alone in the universe. A few years ago, this notion seemed far-fetched. Today, the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence is taken for granted by most scientists. Even the state National Academy of Sciences has gone on record that contact with other civilizations is no longer something beyond our dreams, but a natural event in the history of mankind that will perhaps occur in the lifetime of many of us. The world-leading radio astronomers have calculated that even allowing for a margin of error of 5,000%, there must be in our galaxy about 100 million stars, which have planets with the right chemistry, dimensions, and temperature to support organic evolution. If we consider that our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is but one at least a billion other galaxies similar to ours in the observable universe, the number of stars that could have support some form of life is to reach a word astronomical. As to advanced forms of life, advanced by our own miserable Earth standards, National Radio Astronomer Observatory at Greenbelt, West Virginia, has stated that putting all our knowledge together, the number of civilizations which can have arisen by now is about 1 billion. The next question is, where is everybody? The nearest neighbor to our solar system is Alpha Centauri, only about 4.3 light years away. But according to National Aeronautics and Space Administration, its planetary system is probably too young for the emergence of life. As two other heavenly friends, Epsilon Eridani and Tau Cetus, about 11 light years away, are stronger contenders for harboring life. Nevertheless, the superior civilizations are abundant. The nearest would probably be at least 100 light years away. Therefore, it would take 200 years for a reply to be forthcoming, a smaller matter of 7 generations. And this should, however, make little difference to us in view of the enormous potential gain from our contact with a superior civilization. Unless we are terribly conceited, a very unscientific demeanor, we must assume that the others are far more advanced than we are. Even a 50-year gap would be tremendous. A 500-year gap staggers the imagination. And as far as 5,000-year gap. By the way, if they are as much as 50 years behind us, forget it. It is quite possible that others have satellite probes in space, retransmitting to them anything that sounds non-random to the probe, but they have probably called us several thousand years ago. They are waiting for an answer, or worse yet, they have given up, or more probably, they have reached such impressive technological advances that they have destroyed themselves. Profound crisis would lie in the wait for developing civilization, any one of which may well prove fatal. Self-destruction as a result of a thermonuclear catastrophe, or some other discovery which may have unpredictable and uncontrollable consequences. Genetic danger, overproduction of information, restricted capacity of the individual's brain, which can lead to excessive specialization, with consequent dangers of degeneration, and a crisis precipitated by the creation of artificial intelligent beings, Epsilon Eridani, Tau Cetus, with the targets on 1960 in Project Cosmo, that attempted to take possible intelligent signals from outer space. The frequency selected for listening was 1,420,405,752 megacycles per second, or a wavelength of 21 centimeters. And this particular frequency postulated, independently by astrophysicists, happens to be the radiation frequency of atomic or free hydrogen, which permeates space in great clouds. Moreover, this frequency is within the range of radio frequencies able to pass through the Earth's atmosphere. Presumably, the significance of this frequency would be known to other intelligent beings in the universe who understand radio theory. We are still talking about radio waves as a communication medium. Other possible media might be masers, lasers, and as yet undiscovered and unnamed razors. A technology superior to ours might even have learned how to modulate a beam of neutrinos, weightless uncharged particles that physicists on Earth find it difficult to even detect. If so, they may have to wait a century or two before we learn how to build a neutrino receiver. The growing presumption that life exists on other worlds led in 1971 to a six-nation multidisciplinary conference held in Soviet Armenia on communication with extraterrestrial intelligence. The U.S. delegation of about 24 scientists was headed by Dr. Carl Sagan of the Center for Radiophysics and Space Research at Cornell University. A report to this conference published in 1973 by MIT deals with such subjects as the evolution of intelligence, the lifetimes of technical civilizations, and the number of advanced galactic civilizations. A group of scientists at Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico sent a 3-minute message beamed at Messier 13, and this represented man's first attempt to take the initiative in communicating with another civilization. The project was conducted by National Astronomy and Ionosphere Center, which operates the Arecibo Observatory for Cornell University, the National Science Foundation. Messier 13 is a cluster of 300,000 stars on the edge of the Milky Way, 24,000 light years away. So if the message is received and answered promptly, unless we happen to hit them on one of their 3-day holidays, we should have their answer in 48,000 years, give or take a day or two. Actually, the main purpose of the experiment was to dramatize the capabilities of the world's largest antenna at the Arecibo Observatory. If another civilization were trying to establish communication with us, it would first embark on attention-getting signals of such a nature that we could distinguish them from random cosmic noise. Once we receive a recognizable signal, we have a good chance of understanding the message. For example, they could start with trains of signals corresponding to the natural number 1, 2, 3, followed perhaps by prime numbers. They might continue with equal-length extended signals consisting of start and stop impulses, with occasional pulses in between. When these signals are aligned flush over one another, they could show a circle, the Pythagorean theorem. Or similar geometric design, these attention-getting signals would be followed by what amounts to early language lessons, interspersed with items of technical information to help bring us up to the level of our superiors, them. It may be assumed that the sense of sight, or the equivalent, is possessed by all higher forms of life. The problems of communication could thus be greatly simplified through the medium of a raster representation, such as that of a television screen. After a conference held at Green Bank in 1961 to discuss the possibility of communication with other planets, one of the participants, Bernard M. Oliver, made up a hypothetical message on the raster principle. The message, consisting of 1,271 binary digits, or bits, has but 2 prime factors, 31 and 41, which would naturally lead to write out the message in a raster form, and 41 lines of 31 bits, each, or in 31 lines of 41 bits each. The latter case reveals a greater non-randomness in the patterns disclosed, indicating that these are the correct dimensions. Writing down to the message in which the binary ones have been replaced by dot, and the zeros left up blank spaces. Now for its interpretation. There are dots at the 4 corners of the pictogram as reference points, marking the outlines of the rectangle. At the upper left is a representation of the sun. Directly underneath the column are dots representing 8 planets, identified by the appropriate binary coding to their left, preceding by a binary point as a marker. The red 2-legged beings illustrated are obviously bisexual and mammalian. One hand of the male figure points to the 4th planet where they apparently reside. At the top of the pictogram may be seen representations of hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen atoms, indicating that the chemical structure of life on their planet is similar to ours. From the 3rd planet there emerges a wavy line, showing that it is covered with water. The fish shows that they must have visited us, and therefore have space travel. One hand of the female figure points to a 6, preceded by the usual binary point, perhaps implying that there are 6 fingers on each hand. We can therefore assume that their number system is probably to the base 12. At the right of the female figure may be seen a bracket, in the middle of which is 11 in binary form, preceded by binary point. This implies that the beings are 11 units high. A reasonable interpretation is that the unit is 21 centimeters, the wavelength of the transmission, making them about 7.5 feet tall, which should be alright for average Martians. Ufologists pointed out that number is the most universal concept for establishing communications between intelligent beings. Therefore, mathematics forms the basis for the first steps in extraterrestrial communication. They then illustrated how they could transmit pulses representing integers and distinctive signals, or radio lips representing plus, minus, and equals, and so on. Ufologists later carried out the basic idea a little further, using different pulse shapes to represent elementary mathematical symbols. Ufologists try to establish a communication of ideas through symbolic logic, but the general consensus of those who have taken the trouble to study is that this plan is too difficult. After all, the object of the exercise is getting ideas across to another party whose thinking processes may be entirely different from our own. In other words, what we need to develop is an inverse cryptography or communication symbolism, specially designed not to hide meaning, but to be as easy as possible to comprehend. Cleverness on the part of the sender and send, the important factor, not reliance on ingenuity of the recipient. The inverse cryptographer, somehow this term doesn't sound quite right, must make his meaning clear to the recipient, even if the latter does not possess a cosmic equivalent of the Rosetta Stone. As an illustration of how much information can be conveyed with a minimum of material, and as an example of facile inverse cryptography, let us consider a message I have devised to be typical of what we might expect of an initial communication from outer space. Shown a series of transmissions which could have come from another inhabited planet many light years away. The 32 arbitrary symbols are representations for the 32 different signals, combinations of beeps, or distinctive pulse shapes, heard on a frequency of 1,420.4 megacycles. The punctuation marks are not part of the message, but here represent different time lapses. Adjacent symbols are sent with a short pause, 1 unit. Between them, a space between symbols means a longer pause. 2 units, commas, semicolons, and periods indicate pauses of 4, 8, and 16 units, respectively, between transmissions, numbered here for reference purposes. There is a time lapse of 32 units. The first transmission point is obviously enumeration of the 32 different symbols which will be used in the communications and transmission. 2 is a clear implication that A represents the integer 1, B the integer 2, and so on, to J being the integer 10. In transmission 3, the symbol K for a plus sign and L for equals are introduced. In 4, the symbol M stands for minus. In 5, the symbol N stands for the concept and sign for 0. In 6, the concept of decimal notation introduced. In 7, the symbol O must stand for the multiplication sign. In 8, the symbol P must stand for the sign for division. In 9, the symbol Q must represent a sign for the reciprocal. And in 10, the symbol R must stand for the decimal point. In the next 10 transmissions, there are introduced the concept and symbols for inequalities and approximations, nested, parentheses and brackets, powers and roots, factorials, and infinite series, defining pi and e. Transmission 21 adds nothing new to the 31 symbols we covered thus far, but it does quote one of the most beautiful concepts in pure mathematics, Euler's identity, e to the power iw, plus 1 equals 0. With this, they are telling us that if they can teach us such a complex notion, that at this early stage, we will be staggered by what they will teach us by the 200th and 2000th transmission. Beginning with transmission 22, words and word cluster concepts are introduced, so that by the time we come to transmission 30, we are now understanding the manner of speaking. Here are Vaderian sentences. Furthermore, we can now see how we can recover the code they are using on us, and which will obviously consist of thousands upon thousands of code groups with different meaning. This is easily appreciated by anyone who takes the trouble to fathom the meaning of all 30 transmissions in the foregoing example. Even right after the first series of transmissions, if we are in direct communication with that planet, we shall have questions to put to them, the proof of Fermat's last theorem, Goldbach's conjecture, and many other unsolved problems in mathematics and the natural sciences. By the way, Goldbach's notorious conjecture is called by that adjective only because other mathematicians weren't imaginative enough to make the conjecture themselves. It states that every even number greater than 2 can be expressed as a sum of 2 primes. It will not be difficult for them to demonstrate their intellectual and technological superiority. First of all, don't forget, it was they who were able to call us. If they but know the 7th digit of the fine structure, constant, they are ages ahead of us. We know only the first 5, for sure. Suspect the 6th. This number 137,039 is the ratio, among others, of the speed of light to the speed of the hydrogen electron. It may take a century to calculate this constant, the 9 digits. And after we resolve our pressing scientific questions, it might be appropriate to make discreet inquiries as to how we can live in harmony and peace with our fellow man. That is, if we aren't eaten or otherwise ingested by the superior civilization that had the good fortune to contact us. But as far as the cryptologist is concerned, he and generations of his descendants, who might experience the supreme thrill of their lives when we hear from them, must keep a level head, not get excited, and be prepared to cope with problems the likes of which he has never seen out in this world, so to speak. This video was created for educational purposes only. Codename Will, Professor Christopher Brunet, leader of research, scientist, ufologist, psychic, computer programmer, computer technician, philanthropist, writer, mathematician, artist, photographer, film producer, chef, animal, and nature lover. Passion, world peace. Hope you enjoyed listening. Until next time, have an excellent day. Good day. This is the Professor.